Welcome to Faith Fondue, a new podcast featuring me, author and speaker Haley DeMaria, and teacher and blogger Ann Strickers. Faith Fondue will feature a melting pot of topics, ignited by a flame, our faith, and guided by the Holy Spirit. Each week we will feature a theme, and the theme for this week's episode is joy. Ann, welcome to week 3 of our podcast.
Happy third Sunday in Advent, Haley. Today is also known as Gaudete Sunday. It's the week of December 13th. And last week's theme was love. And as Haley mentioned, this week we will talk about joy. We'll talk about joy with the flame. That's kind of our section on what's cooking, what's hot. We'll move into joy as the meat of our spiritual stew and conclude with the melting pot. What are cheesy stories, nuggets of inspiration, and pieces of perspective on joy? So last week, Haley, we talked about love and we talked about baking with love. Now, I heard you were busy this week.
Yep, we were, Ann. I was inspired by you. I heard you make a mean pumpkin snickerdoodle cookie that was made with love, and so we started baking this week. I baked with my son, which of course is love in itself. I obviously enjoy any moment that I can get with my teenage son, but also baked with your special ingredient, love. And you're right, it does make things taste better. So we tried a couple of new recipes that came from a friend, which is always fun to do, always makes you a little nervous. But it's an easy recipe to make a lot of cookies because we are attempting a socially distant cookie exchange. I have a group of friends that I've done a cookie exchange with for about 12 years, and it was really sad to think that we might not be able to do that this year since we're all giving up so much and because we're all going to be home. So we are going to attempt to meet outside, and there's only 8 of us, so we'll be under the 10-person limit, and we will try to stand apart and pass out the cookies. But really enjoyed baking this week, thought of you, and enjoyed the time with my son.
Isn't it amazing that a plate of cookies can bring such joy? The color, the varieties. Is there one that you're looking forward to, Haley?
So one of the ones that I tried, so the one that I enjoy the most is a fudge that my mom makes, and it's really kind of a pain because it's very laborious. I'm not sure that's the correct word, but it takes a long time to make. It takes 3 steps, and you have to wait 24 hours between each step. So I don't know if I'm looking forward to making that. I'm looking forward to eating it. But the one I really enjoyed this time, it's a new one, is a pretzel on the bottom with a half melted candy cane Hershey Kiss with a green M&M on top. So it's red and white striped with a green M&M, and it's super fun looking. And it tastes like a Thin Mint, which everybody loves. So we had a great time. That was truly joyful for me this week, was baking, and I love doing it.
It sounds delightful. And yes, that extra ingredient, it's fun to think about, even with, yes, some treats are more laborious than others. I think that's fair to say, just like anything in life, right?
Right. Yes.
One of the things I wanted to talk about, Haley, you last week had mentioned the mission statement of your coach, your swimming coach at Notre Dame, Tim Welsh, and saying that the purpose of Notre Dame swimming is to pursue athletic excellence with self-discipline and love for one another. And his emphasis on that word love. And as we were preparing for this week's theme, joy, I've heard one coach talk about that in his sort of mission statement. So Steve Kerr is the head coach of the Golden State Warriors. And I read a story before he took over that position. He met with Pete Carroll, the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, and kind of shadowed him. And as a coach and an athletic director, we really encourage coaches to do this. You know, it's kind of like observations for teachers. You can learn from other ones. And one thing Pete Carroll has done is he does build wonderful team chemistry among his athletes. He's known for that. And so he asked Coach Kerr, what are your plans? So that prompted Coach Kerr to come up with, he calls them his 4 core values. and their mindfulness. And mindfulness is simply just kind of be aware of what's going on around you. Now, obviously, on the court, that is incredibly important, but also like mindfulness that these men get to play a game for a living. And it's a great, they get to use their gifts and talents in a way that so many people want to do, but they're in the position to do it. Competition is the second core value. And competition in this sense is striving together that you make your opponent, I mean, your teammates better by working harder, by, you know, by your work ethic, like inspiring others, not tearing them down, but building them up. Three is compassion. Really have an understanding of what your teammates might be going through. So that might be injury, that might be you've been traded and you were on one team yesterday and today you're here in San Francisco, or injuries, family obligations, etc. But his fourth core value, and he speaks about this one the most, is joy. And he says that joy is fun, enthusiasm, and he says Steph Curry is the player he looks to. He says Steph plays with joy. And I thought, what a great way to be described as an athlete, that you play with joy. And the word enthusiasm, entheos, right, from God. I learned that. Shout out to Kristen Sheehan. She talks a lot. She writes about that, but that you carry something within you when you play with enthusiasm, right? God's gifts and talents shown through you. And I like to think about that Steph Curry is someone who plays with joy.
So, Anne, I love this. I've always been a Steve Kerr fan, back at his time with Arizona. I really enjoyed, and we could talk about this probably in another episode at length. I really enjoyed the Steve Kerr part of the Michael Jordan series that aired.
Yeah.
Well, we watched it during quarantine. But I have a lot of respect for Pete Carroll. I can't say I like him a lot. I still have some scars from his days at USC coaching down there, but boy, is he a great coach. And you're right, he does put together a great team and great team culture. Looking at these four core values, obviously competition speaks for itself, and mindfulness is something that we could all learn more about. But looking at compassion and joy, I love the compassion piece. That reminds me of Tim's part of the mission statement where he talks about love for one another, because really that's what compassion is loving your teammates, having compassion for them, understanding them, knowing what's going on. Really that's what Tim wanted for us as well, was for us to love one another, have that compassion and understanding for one another and what they're going through. So that's such a great piece that fits into something that I'm very familiar with. But the joy piece, to me, I completely get. I have always said that as an athlete, you have to love what you do. You have to have fun doing it. And it's not always fun, certainly being an athlete at any level, but certainly at the level that, that Steve Kerr is coaching at, and, even that I swam at in college. It's hard. So it's not always fun, but you really have to love doing it. And, I always use the example when I was in high school, my fastest times that I swam were not at nationals, were not at any of my USA swimming meets. The fastest times I had were at Arizona High School State, because I loved swimming for my high school team. It was just fun. For an individual sport where it was just me and my races and what I was going to do, being part of a team on my high school program gave us a team goal. It gave us something to work towards. I loved the relays. My efforts really meant something. So my fastest times were always at Arizona High School State, which is a pretty fast meet anyway, but I really believe it was because I was having fun. And that was a really fun time. So I get it. The joy and that enthusiasm really makes a difference, not only for athletes, but really for anybody. If you don't love what you do, it's going to be hard to give it that enthusiasm and passion that it deserves to do it well.
As a coach of an individual sport, as a girls golf coach, Haley, I love hearing that. And yeah, you do hope in those moments that you can play for yourself. Of course, you want, you have to be driven in swimming, in golf, in tennis, cross country, track. But when you shift kind of the purpose, like you were saying here, you're representing Xavier, you're representing something so much larger than you. There really is I don't know if it's a freedom or if it's just a joy, like you're saying, to be able to do that, it does take some of it's a different perspective, I'm sure. So I love hearing, again, because that's our challenge as a coach of an individual sport, getting, young people to play for something bigger than themselves. And I do think that's true in the NBA as well, right? There are a lot of, any professional athlete, there's a lot of egos, and it's driven by star power. But if you can bring that over to somebody else, it changes the paradigm. And I'm struck by how you continue to bring things back to Arizona. So yes, Steve Kerr played for University of Arizona, but as I was speaking, I thought of another Arizona connection. I think one of the athletes who did that like nobody else was Steve Nash, right? And he played for the Suns, and they said he was the ideal teammate. Why? Because he made everyone around him better, right? He knew your strengths, and he would play those up to the point where he almost faded away, but he was two-time MVP. So clearly he didn't. And I love that.
Yeah, that's great. And I have to tell you, Anne, one thing that was not so joyful in our house yesterday or this weekend was watching the Army Navy game. We're in Annapolis, Maryland, and we love our Navy midshipmen, and drove several of them to the airport today as they're heading home for their vacation, which is great because they haven't had a break since, some of them since last semester, and most of them since the summer. But it's America's game, and watching the midshipmen and the cadets on the field, it's the best of it's the best of our country, and the joy that they watched the game with was really fun to see. At least towards the end, unless you were an Army fan and cheering for them. But one thing that was really interesting for me watching that game was, it started off, it's on national TV, as we all know, but it started off with a prayer. And I really took note of that because that's not always the case before a college football game. Certainly it happens in a Notre Dame locker room, and even at Notre Dame games when you're in the stands, they show the prayer on the big screen. But I took note of that, and I thought that was interesting. I enjoyed hearing it. But I was curious to see how other people reacted. So if anyone is listening and has a different opinion or not, I think it would be fun to see how others reacted to a prayer before a college football game on national TV, without getting too political, but just being prayerful. But what I think it speaks to is, especially during the Army Navy game, everyone is working towards something greater than themselves. And, Army Navy exemplifies that the most. They're there to serve our country, and they are the best of the military and will be leading us for many generations. So that was not quite a joyful day because, of course, we wanted Navy to win, but America always wins in that game.
Yeah, that's a great tradition. It is something because, well, this year is so different, but usually this is one of the later games before all the bowl games. So I know next Saturday I look forward to the ACC championship, and I was thinking, this is such a great week for example, players like at Notre Dame, where they've had a great season, they're undefeated. Next week, who knows what's going to happen, but they're in this place right now where they can kind of savor their accomplishments. So I've really enjoyed interviews with Ian Book, right? And all the positive press he's getting. And we don't know what's going to happen next week with a healthy Clemson, Trevor Lawrence leading the way. But there are those moments in time for teams, et cetera, that they can just enjoy the journey where they've been, and they're not done, right? But I do hope that they are able to just kind of savor the hard work that they've done. So, well, congratulations, Army. I have to,
Yes, absolutely. You're right.
Yeah, great tradition. So let's move into our next section, which is the spiritual stew. Has there been a gospel reading? I don't know, Haley, I can't believe it's the third week of Advent, right? And we're lighting that third candle, but the readings this week are very powerful.
Yes. In fact, today's gospel, or this Sunday's gospel, the third Sunday in Advent, our priest opened his homily this morning by saying, we finally get to light that pink candle. That's always how I taught my children which one you light first on the Advent calendar. You always light the candle that is opposite The pink one, rose, I believe, colored, but doesn't matter which way you go, but that's the first one. So for me, the Sunday's gospel, Luke 1:26-38, includes the words that are the inspiration for the Hail Mary. In the gospel, it reads, Hail, full of grace, the Lord is with you. And for me, the Hail Mary has been such a personal prayer because, not growing up Catholic, but going to a Catholic high school, that was the prayer that we said before every swim meet.
Mm.
And it was really the first Catholic prayer that I really learned. And I wanted to fit in with my teammates, most of whom were Catholic. And so I really listened to the words because I wanted to learn them.
Wow.
And I find myself still doing that, saying the Hail Mary, very intentionally each word. So often, and my family certainly falls victim to this. When we're saying prayer, before dinner, and I feel like we're just sort of reciting words and just saying them, and sometimes too quickly and blowing through that. But the Hail Mary, I have always loved and appreciated, one, because it was that first Catholic prayer that I learned, and two, because I've always really listened to the words, and so they always jump out at me when I hear them in the gospel. And I love the words, Hail, full of grace, because boy, grace is such a beautiful word that I would just love to have someone describe me as a graceful person. I'm not sure that will happen, but just that sense of being full of grace is amazing. And then the Lord is with you. The Lord is with you, like He's with you. Those words are amazing. And so I always say those and hear them very intentionally. And then, even the alternate gospel reading that you could have today, Luke 1:39-47, most blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And when I say or hear those words, I always think of Mary, and then I always have this vision of all these women around Mary. And that's just the image that I always have. So I loved this gospel. I love hearing the words from the Hail Mary. It's just a really meaningful prayer for me because it was really the first one that I learned. And I think that's always kind of something special to us.
That's beautiful, Haley. We were talking about enthusiasm, and in a podcast, I can see you, but our listeners only hear you. But I think regardless if it's seeing or hearing you, we can hear and see your enthusiasm. I can see it on the screen as you were sharing what that prayer meant to you. So thank you for that. I do refer to the Hail Mary as kind of my go-to prayer. I've thought about this when in moments in my life where I'm in trouble, or, I had a cardiac event in my life, and that is the prayer that I say. And I've thought about, why do I say that? And that's about relationship, right? It's like a mother, right? I'm reaching out to Our Lady, our mother. And when we are in need, when we are scared, when we have fear, but also, right, in glory or in great moments, what is our prayer? And for me, yes, that has been the Hail Mary, because I value your perspective on this as a Catholic prayer, because Catholics do have a special love and devotion to Our Lady. And for people who are not Catholic, they might wonder, right? We don't pray, we don't worship Mary, we venerate her. She has a special position in our lives of faith because she is the mother of the Word. She is the mother of Christ. So no one is, it would be hard to argue if anyone's closer to our Lord than Our Lady. So that's a valuable perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, and what a great distinction. I love that, and I'll have to remember that and use that. We don't worship her; we venerate her. That's I like that. I'll have to make note of that.
And distinctions are important. I talked a little bit about that to my niece today. Actually, my niece's name is Grace. So when you were talking about that, I think it's such a beautiful name too, not only a word. And she asked me to be her confirmation sponsor. And one of the things she has to choose is a patron saint. And so it came to me after our phone call, but I thought, well, Grace ought to choose, and it's her choice. I started talking about Mother Teresa, Saint Teresa of Calcutta, but I thought she should go for Our Lady, for Mary, Saint Mary, right? She is the greatest of all women, and this prayer really lauds her for her fiat, for her yes, for our Lord. And so, we can all use maybe a little more Mary in our lives in this way. Not the Mary Martha that we talked about in episode 1, but this willingness to magnify the Lord.
Yes, and to be filled with grace.
Amen. The spiritual reading that I have thought about this week in terms of joy is something I've used in class, and it's papal writing. So Pope Paul VI in 1975, he wrote Gaudete in Domino, which is joy in the world, right? And that's what we're thinking of, Gaudete Sunday, but in our world. And these are times where we really need joy. And I joked, with my students, a lot of times when they encounter like a papal writing, it's about a challenging topic in our world. So for example, care for the environment, right? Our environment has been compromised, or the suffering or the challenge to human life on so many different levels. But this one was just on the topic of joy, and he felt that there was a need to teach people about joy, and that there are simple ways that every human being could experience joy, and that our God, who is a loving God, has put joy quite literally in our path. So this papal writing, though maybe formal, there was a breakdown that I used with students, and it pointed to just a couple of ways, like the joy and existence of life itself, that we are here, the joy of sanctified love, the peaceful joy of nature and silence, the joy that comes from like hard work, knowing you've done a job well, the joy and satisfaction of service or of sharing, and also the demanding joy of sacrifice. So being a Christian means that we will encounter joy in these simple ways, and we ought to pay attention to it.
And I love that. And, it reminds me of something that I saw you posted this week. One thing I had read in reading about joy was a question that Pope Benedict the 16 posed back in 2007, which is joy still possible during a time of suffering? And, this is a real time of suffering for some people and a struggle. And I know you had some challenges this week as well, and yet what I saw on your social media were some really joyful posts. And I thought, yes, you can find joy during a time of suffering, and Anne has done that. So tell us about that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, sometimes, Haley, these encounters are just happy accidents, but I did share them. One question I've had in related to what you're saying about Pope Benedict is, I'm concerned for young people. Like, what are they doing that's fun for them or bringing them joy? So I live in a city that's shelter in place. We are very restricted in terms of what we can do. And one day I was just really struggling. A friend of mine is going through some hard times, and I decided, I live near Ocean Beach, and I had to drop something off. So I thought, I'm going to go walking along the beach. Now, the weather here in San Francisco has been unbelievable. And I always joke about this. As a golfer, you're always obsessed with the weather, but there's been no wind, and it's just been delightful. And I walked out, I parked on this Irving Street, and there's a bunch of surf shops, which is just so cool. That's a different culture that I don't know a lot about, but I enjoy kind of thinking about. And I walked. The Great Highway is Highway 1. It's closed. So for residents, you can walk, bike, rollerblade, bring your dog out there. So it is one of the few things we're able to do. And there were a lot of people out. It was probably 4:45, 5 o'clock. People are done with their workday. The surf was really high, and the sun was setting. And it was just miraculous. It was so beautiful. And I thought, this costs nothing to be out here. And this was really a gift. And in that moment, it's so hard not to just appreciate the beauty of what God has created. And talked about that, like beholding a moment of beauty as a spiritual discipline in sport. But this is something that I said to my students, I said, hey, go out to Ocean Beach if you get a chance, and just walk along the beach, right? There's sand dollars. There's, I said there's weird people. There's, there's, there was somebody swimming in the ocean. There's so much. I know. There's some riptides out there. There were surfers. There's so much to just take in and delight. So I think Pope Paul VI would agree that that's one of the tenets of joy.
Well, absolutely. And you clearly lived what he talks about of peaceful joy of nature and silence. I'm sure you spent a lot of that time on your walk in silence, just taking it all in. And what a gift, you have to be able to do that. I don't know if a lot of I think there are some people who are unable to do that. And I think that's our hope for everyone, is to find that inner joy. There's a difference between joy and happiness. Happiness, and sadness or feelings, they come and go. And I view joy more like grace. Joy is a state of being. Joy, we can be a joyful person that chooses to see the joy in life and also have moments of sadness. And clearly, Anne, you have that gift. You live in that perpetual state of joy, where there are times that are hard and sad and we suffer, but you still have that ability to find that joy.
Well, thank you. And thanks for that distinction, Haley. I think we were talking about veneration versus worship, and yeah, happiness versus joy. Those are distinctions that are important. And yeah, I could carry that sadness of a friend, but also in that moment, delight in something. And this book called The 1 Minute Philosopher makes an interesting distinction about that. It says there's an objective quality to joy. So, like the birth of a child, the success of a person when they've worked really hard, like regardless of a person's place or their feelings in that moment, it's outside of them, and we can say, wow, yeah, that a birth of a child, that is a miracle. Or good for him or her, they've worked hard and they achieved what they hoped. So joy is something for us, I think, to all think a little bit more about and pass on.
So, Anne, moving on to the melting pot, because I know you have a great story here that I loved hearing, and I look forward to hearing it again. You know, tell us your takeaway. Tell us, share with us a pretty powerful story of finding joy in life.
So, listeners will, if you haven't picked up on this before, but one of my favorite things is a great story. I love good stories. They nourish me, and I hope to pass them on, and I hope you'll pass them on to me. And I think, Haley, that's a big part of where our friendship began, because your story is just so powerful. And it's not a short story, it's an ongoing story, but it's a powerful story. And one of my favorite writers is Jim Martin, Father Jim Martin. He's a Jesuit priest, and he wrote a book a couple years ago. And I think he's right. He said there was a real need for joy and laughter in the Catholic Church. Talk about hard times with the sex abuse crisis and leadership. Yes, whoa, very difficult. The faithful in the church, right? Where are we finding joy? And remotely can we find laughter? So he wrote this book called Between Heaven and Mirth: Why Joy, Humor, and Laughter Are at the Heart of the Spiritual Life, and speaks to the need for that. And from that book, he went on a book tour, and it became kind of like a three-man show of people who speak and write about joy. So Jim Martin, Timothy Cardinal Dolan, the leader, religious leader in New York, the Cardinal of New York City, and Stephen Colbert, right? And people know Stephen Colbert from late night television, but this was such an incredible story. So people probably know Stephen Colbert is a devout and he's faithful Catholic, and he's spoken about that. But what I didn't know is he's the youngest of 11 children. And he was raised by Catholic parents. And at the age of 10, his father and two brothers died in a plane crash. And Colbert tells the story of riding in a limousine to the funeral. And one of his sisters made his other sister laugh so unbelievably hard, she fell off the seat in the limo. And he vowed from that point on that he wanted to do that for a living, to make people laugh. So quite literally, Stephen Colbert's goal in life is to bring joy, right, through laughter, which is such a great way, if you have that gift, right, to be able to do that. What a great story. So I've thought a lot about the power of humor and joy even to your point, like of Benedict's question, in the height of suffering, is it possible?
Right. That's exactly what I thought of was Benedict's quote and or question. And, in his darkest days, his darkest moment of his life, found that joy, that grace that he received from God through his sister and their laughter, really changed the course of his life. And he did find that joy. So I think that is such a great takeaway as, we go through this third week of Advent, and we try during a time that can be really challenging. Many of us are looking at holidays that look different and maybe not seeing those that we would normally see, whether it's loved ones, family, friends. Maybe, may or may not be having my cookie exchange that I've been hoping to have and have had for many years. But, to find that joy every day and to be a joyful person, to receive that gift of God's grace. Of course, next week is gifts. That's always a fun one to talk about. The fourth Sunday in Advent, the gifts. But and I have to say, one of the joys of my week is thinking about what we're going to talk about on this podcast. And so, I thank you for that, sharing all of this time with you, and looking at life, you really on a daily basis through the lens of faith fondue and sharing our faith, and that has brought me joy and really keeps my focus where it should be, quite honestly. And sometimes we all sort of drift and wander, but the focus for me has been really great. So any last parting thoughts that you want to share, Anne?
Well, as you were talking and I was thinking of your story, Haley, I was thinking of your book and people who brought you joy when you were in the hospital. Like you mentioned a number of people, but I was kind of struck by the memory of teammates bringing flowers and balloons. And this past week, my boss, he loves birthdays, and he brought a coworker a bunch of cupcakes and a balloon. And I just thought it was so sweet that a balloon could be something that brings joy, and connecting it back to that memory that of what you wrote about the hospital room. And so it is those small things, whether it's a cookie exchange and finding the gingerbread man on that plate, or the pumpkin snickerdoodles, which I should link the recipe in the show notes.
Absolutely.
Right. Or yeah, just our time together. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for listening. I hope that each one of us finds joy this week. I hope we are able to do things we love and spend time with those that we love, because I know that all of that brings us joy and the grace that God hopes for us. So that is all from Anne and Haley this week with Faith Fondue, and we look forward to next week as we move into the fourth Sunday of Advent and gifts.